Today's the big day. Today is the day that we are starting our sock knitting tutorials with myself, Caroline, Off the Grid Needlearts, Louise Patterson from Wildflower Wool, who is the designer of the pattern that we will be using, and Gerald Designs, Gerald Stitcher, who is our guinea pig, new knitter who will be learning how to knit socks. This idea came about, Gerald and I are good friends, and he wanted to learn how to knit. So this whole series of videos was started because of our friendship. And we started off with a dishcloth. We moved on to a hat. Then we learned how to knit mittens, and now we're moving on to socks. All of these videos can be found in playlist section of my channel, and they are separated out into the Learn to Knit videos. I have started a Facebook group for all of our new members who will be learning how to knit socks. You can find it on Facebook. It's called Learn to Knit with Us. I will also provide a link to that group in the drop-down box below. And it is a closed group, so there will be a question to answer in order to get into the group, just so that I know you're a knitter and joining along with us for the sock knitting journey. Louise Patterson is going to be an admin of that group. She is a local knitting teacher here in London, Ontario, and she is the one who taught me how to knit socks. So she's been teaching for many years. She's seen pretty much every problem that can crop up. So if you have any problems at all with your knitting, with any of the steps, please come on to the Facebook group, leave a photo, leave a question, because chances are pretty good that there's at least a few other knitters who probably have the same question, and it would be helpful to everyone. So she will be available on that Facebook group. It is a purchased pattern. Her design for the super simple sock pattern can be found on Ravelry. Again, link in the drop-down box below. And you know, sometimes people will say, oh, well, you can find free patterns of these on Ravelry and on the internet. And yeah, that's true. I like Louise's version because it includes every single step of the sock. And in a minute, we're going to go through the anatomy of a sock, and you'll see there are a few different steps. I like having a plain vanilla sock pattern all in one place. I still reference it, my original copy of her pattern, I still reference it today. It is a very useful thing to have. And I'll talk more about the bits and pieces of a sock in a minute. Okay, so that's it for all of my beginning stuff. I'm going to flip the camera view now so that you can see what I am going to be talking about a little more closely. The rest of the knitting tutorial videos will most likely be focused on my hands and the knitting that I and Louise will be doing. Some of the videos will be just me, some of the videos will be both Louise and I together. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you for joining, and here we go. Let's get started. So first and foremost, we should probably talk about our supplies. There's a few things that we need in order to produce a pair of socks. There are two different kinds of needles, knitting styles that I will be showing in these tutorials. There are other ways to knit socks. There's one way called the magic loop method. I won't be doing that in these tutorials. I'm going to be using DPNs, which are double pointed needles. And I'm also going to be using a small 9-inch circular needle. And I'm going to be knitting these in tandem. So I'm going to have one sock on my DPNs, and I'm going to have one sock on my small circular. Now, when I knitting on a circular is my preferred method, but lots of people, they prefer to use DPNs. It really is personal preference. A lot of this journey is going to be about learning what you prefer and what you like. And don't be hesitant to try something else. If something's not working for you, give something else a try. Usually these supplies are inexpensive enough that you can try a different needle, or you can try a different size of needle. If your fabric is too loose, go down a needle size. Experiment with things and see what works. When I use a small circular needle, I still actually do my heels and my toes with DPNs because that's just how I prefer to do it. Louise knows how to do and continue her heel on the circular needle. So when we get to that point, I'm going to invite her to come on with me and show us all how to continue on with the heel flap with the small circular needle. There are a few different brands of the circular needle. Addi Turbo makes one. It's either Addi, just Addi, or Addi Turbo. It's ADDI. They make an 8-inch small circular. The brand that I use, and they have no idea who I am, so this isn't a commercial or anything like that. I use Haya Sharps because the points of them are nice and sharp, literally. Haya Sharps. They're called Sharps for a reason. And I find that with the tiny yarn, it makes that nice sharp point, makes it quite easy to pick up the stitches. The other brand that I've heard lots of people say really good things about is ChowGoo. And I know that Gerald, I believe, will be knitting his socks on ChowGoo needles. So I'm interested to hear his thoughts about those needles, because maybe I'll treat myself to a pair. Okay, so now, size of needles. When we buy our DPNs, used to be that they came in a set of 4. Now they come in a set of 5. We knit our socks using 4 needles. So the sock is divided up onto 4 needles, and then the 5th needle is the one we knit with. Used to be 4, now it's 5. And if you learned way back in the day to use 4 needles total and that 5th one feels weird and extra, just do whatever works for you. Okay, so we've got our needles sorted out, and we'll talk about size of the needle next. Louise's pattern calls for either a 2.25 or a 2.5 millimeter needle. And off the top of my head, actually, let's see if these ones say it. 2.25 is a US 1. Yeah, that's a US 1 is the 2.25. That's the size that I use because I'm quite a loose knitter, and so I find that I need that smaller needle size in order to get a sock that produces a fabric that I'm happy with. Whereas people who are tighter knitters will probably want to use a 2.5 millimeter, which I believe is going to be the US 2. If I'm not mistaken. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I am really very familiar with the millimeter sizes and terminology, more so than the US numbers and size. Okay, so that deals with the sizing of our needles and the type of our needles. Now also, if you prefer wood or bamboo needles, that's perfectly okay. If you prefer metal, that's perfectly okay. Again, you might have to experiment a little bit to find out what you like. Moving into yarn and types of yarn. There are lots of different kinds of sock yarn, running the gamut from inexpensive to very luxurious, expensive hand-dyed yarn from indie dyers. So I've got a few different samples of some selections of yarn that might make good choices for you for a beginner pair of sock. And then I'm sneaking in a few skeins of the luxurious stuff at the end, just to tempt you with what's to come if you fall in love with the craft and decide to splurge a little bit. Okay, so starting off, I have 2 skeins of a very good workhorse sock yarn. Again, just like the Hayas, this is not a commercial. It's just stuff that I've used that I think is quite good quality for the cost. These are quite inexpensive. KnitPicks is an online website for knitters, and they offer lots of different kinds of yarn and needles and accessories for knitters. Lots of different stuff, and very reasonably priced. Believe it or not, they are both 50-gram balls of yarn. The Stroll fingering has a slightly higher twist to the yarn. The yarn ply is slightly higher, slightly more tightly twisted together. The Croy is a little looser. You can see that. The yarn is a little bit more plump. So whichever floats your boat, you're going to need 2 balls to knit a pair of socks. We need about 100 grams to knit a lady's medium pair of socks. And you can get quite a good leg length to that. So for if you buy a 50-gram ball, you'll need 2, 1 for each sock. Balls will also come in 100 grams. For example, Opal yarn makes a 100-gram ball. So this one ball would make a pair. You'd only need 1. You wouldn't need 2. The fun thing about Opal yarn and some of the other brands of sock yarn that are out there, there's lots of them that do this. This is called a self-striping yarn. And so if I look at the pattern back here, and not only is it self-striping, but there's a really cute little pattern in some of the stripes as they knit up. You'll see as you go. I always knit my socks from the cuff down. Lots of people knit toe up, but this tutorial we're going to be going cuff down. And so you can see that the pattern as you knit your way down, the yarn itself makes this pattern. You don't have to do anything to it. The way they've dyed it, it does it all by itself, which is pretty cool. So Opal, again, I think fairly affordable. All 3 of these yarns are very reasonably priced for a pair of sock. The other thing that's important, I think really important to know about sock yarn when you're looking to purchase it, you want to look for a yarn that has some small quantity of nylon in it. So if we look at the label at the back here, you can see that it says 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. You'll find other yarn that's just wool. So maybe it's 100% superwash merino. And you can make socks with that, but they're not going to wear as well as the yarn that already has the nylon in it. You can purchase nylon separately as an addition to your knitting. So if you do have a skein of just plain merino wool, you can add a strand of nylon in with it. And it just adds that bit of strength into those areas of the sock that you would just know that would be problem spots, right? The heel and on the underside of the ball of the foot where it would be likely to wear through. Because we're putting a lot of work and effort and time into knitting our socks, we want them to last as long as possible. So for your first pair of socks, something that's a little less expensive might be a good idea. I will tell you that my very first pair of socks, the first sock that I knit was 3 times the size of the second sock. So the first pair that I knit was never a pair that I ended up wearing. I looked at them as a learning experience and learned how to tweak my knitting for the subsequent pair, which I made for my daughter, and they worked beautifully and they fit her, and she still wears them today. So if your very first sock does not turn out, don't fear. Ask lots of questions, get lots of help, rip the yarn out, try it again. Practice makes perfect. Okay, so this is affordable, easy to find sock yarn. So again, it's fingering weight. It's either called fingering weight or sock yarn. And again, don't forget, you want to find stuff that has a little bit of nylon in it for that added strength. Okay, so now I'm going to show you yarn on the other end of the spectrum. So this is yarn that is specially dyed by an indie dyer. This one has a little bit of cashmere in it. So can you think of anything a little bit more luxurious on your feet than just a tiny smidge of cashmere mixed in with that merino and nylon blend? I can tell you it is super soft. So this I'm planning on knitting into a pair of socks for myself, and I'm super excited about that. And last but not least, I have a very special skein of yarn to share with you today. This is my skein that I will be knitting this pair of socks on for this tutorial. This was hand dyed by my friend Adrienne at Old Oak Yarns. Back in June, I asked her to dye a surprise skein of yarn for Ginger Gerald, who is starting his sock knitting tutorial with you. And his favorite colors are yellow and gray. So she came up with this colorway and she named it New Knitters Are Like Sunshine. And she dyed 3 skeins. One was for Gerald, one was for me, and then the third, if you haven't guessed yet, is for a giveaway that we'll be doing on the Facebook group later on after we start having socks being completed, because this is a pretty special giveaway prize. Now you'll notice something different about this skein of yarn versus this ball of yarn. So If you've never seen yarn sold like this, you should know a few things. You can't just open it up and start knitting, because if you do, well, you'll regret it. Let me tell you that. So I have my seam ripper here. So I am going to very carefully cut Adrian's tag, and I'm going to open this up and show you what you're going to be dealing with. If you buy yarn in a skein, it comes in a large round circle, and you can see that already, if I'm not careful, I'm going to get into trouble and it's going to be a big tangled mess. So now I have it separated carefully into a giant circle of yarn, and you'll notice every once in a while there's some yarn tied around it that is keeping it held together in that circle. So there are a couple of ways to handle this. You can either use a friend to hold the yarn for you, and so they're going to hold it open on their hands like this while you stand beside them, across from them, and wind the yarn into a ball that you can then knit from. Or if you don't have a friend available to hold the yarn for you, you can put it over a chair back. Something that is going to keep this yarn open and in a circle while you wind it into a ball. If you want to go a little more high tech, you can invest in a yarn, what is called a yarn swift, and a ball winder. The yarn swift is what holds the skein of yarn for you while you wind it into a cake of yarn with the ball winder. And as you can see, this partially knit yarn here is in a cake. And so this is what that skein of yarn looks like. Now it's a bit messy because, as you can see, I've been knitting with it. This is what your cake of yarn will look like when it comes off of the ball winder. So, okay, so we've talked about different kinds of yarn, what to look for, how much you need. You need 100 grams to knit a pair of socks. And now let's talk about the anatomy of the sock itself. So I've got a couple of socks in various degrees of completedness here to share with you. So you'll notice these two are the ones that I have finished, and they look slightly different in that this one's a little bit taller, and this one has a different heel construction than this one. So, and that's the really interesting thing about socks. We start with the cuff. You can, there will be different patterns where it might be ribbed, it might have a different rib at the cuff. I like the cuff on my socks ribbed exactly like this, so that's why I tend to do it. And our super simple sock pattern will have a cuff like this at the top. Then we move down into the body of the sock. So we've got the leg. They're the same on both of my socks, except this one is like ½ an inch longer. But you'll notice that the width of my sock is about the same because I know that these will fit me. My heel, these are a little different in that the construction of this one was knit in a different way. This is called a fish lips kiss heel. This one is called a heel flap and gusset. This is the heel construction that we will be learning with this sock. So the heel flap, the gusset, and then moving down into the foot, the body, the rest of the body of the sock, which is the foot, and then the toe at the end. Both of my toes here are the same, except on this sock, quite obviously, I have knit my heel and my toe in a contrasting color because it's fun. So the mates here that I am working on currently, this sock, I am at the point on my circular needle where I need to start my heel. Almost. Am I there? I think I'm there. Best way to know for sure is to count rows. Or you can measure if you don't really care that they're exact. So I'm at the point where I'm ready to add my pink yarn in and do my heel construction on this sock. This one, I've knit my sock and my heel. I've knit down the body of the foot, and now I'm ready to do my toe. So it's at this point where I need to add in my DPNs and finish my toe. We will be learning how to do the Kitchener stitch to complete our toe after we've done our decreases. When we get to the end, you can see here, this end here, that's done using the Kitchener stitch at the end. Louise's pattern includes every single direction that you need for every step of the process along the way. So I think that's it for today. There's no reason why you can't go ahead and cast on the starting of your sock. There are videos earlier on in this Learn to Knit series that include both casting on DPNs and joining in the round. So whether or not you're casting on your small circular or you're casting on your DPNs, you follow the exact same instructions that you would have followed for those other projects that we did. I believe joining in the round was a video in the hat series, and it was done on a circular needle. And then learning how to join in the round on DPNs, I believe I did in the same series, either that or for the mittens, when we cast on for the mittens. So DPNs are going to be a little more fiddly at the beginning, but it just takes a little bit of practice and time. Don't get frustrated. You might get a little frustrated, but that's okay. Just persevere, keep trying. It will work eventually. Ask lots of questions on the Facebook group, and we will help you to the best of our ability. The only difference with the cast on, you'll notice Louise's pattern does not include the extra stitch that I like to add when I join in the round. So you are going to take her instructions and you're going to add one stitch to the cast on, because when I join in the round, if you rewatch that video for joining in the round, you'll notice that I do that. I add the extra stitch, and then when I join in the round, I cast that stitch off in order to make the connection there. So you have to have that extra stitch or you won't have enough cast on stitches for when you do your ribbing, which is a 2x2 knit purl rib. So there's no reason why you can't cast on. Go ahead, start your cuff, and then next Tuesday's video, I'm hoping that my socks, I'm going to have the cuff done on both of my socks so that we can get into the meat and potatoes, the body of the sock, and we'll see how everybody's doing. I think that's it. If there are any questions or concerns or anything of that matter, leave us a message. Please join the Facebook group. Can't wait to help everybody out, see your socks, see the yarn that you've chosen. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. That's it for me. Have a great day. Have a great week. I'll see you next Tuesday for more knitting socks.